They said the lantern found you. Not in a literal way, like a gust of wind blowing it onto your porch, but in an older, quieter way. It showed itself when you needed it most and when you were pretending you didn't. In Cedar Hollow, the lantern lived in stories as much as in light. People left it on the community shelf for funerals and weddings, for lost calves and found keys. Mostly it glowed steady and small, a warm, round heart at the centre of ordinary nights. Lila returned to Cedar Hollow at dusk, the bus rolling past fields that blurred into the blue of late summer. Her case had a cracked scuff on the lid where the road had seen too much of her. She stepped down with a cheap guitar strapped to her back and a fiddle case in her other hand. Years ago, she'd left with a band, with promises and a voice that would not be quiet. Tonight, she walked back like someone returning with a song she couldn't finish. The smell hit her before the sign did, wood smoke and apple pie, the exact combination of home. She passed the diner where Mara still wiped the counter, the barber whose radio always played the same station, the church whose porch light had a habit of turning on late and staying on. Someone had chalked a heart on the post office sidewalk with a name she didn't remember. Cedar Hollow looked like an old record album. Familiar grooves, corners nicked, the sleeve a little sun-faded. At the end of Main, where the road narrowed and the river cut a crescent around the town, stood the lantern shop. Caleb ran it now. He'd known Lila since she could pluck a string without looking. He kept the lanterns on a sagging shelf behind the counter, and he kept his mouth full of half-remembered advice. When she pushed the door open, a bell tinkled, and he looked up from a newspaper as if she were the last thing he'd expected to happen. "You came back," he said simply. He had a voice like cracked cedar, even when he smiled. "I did," Lila said, and she was surprised at how small her voice felt. "For a while." Caleb gave her time to tie her guitar, to set the fiddle case down as if it needed settling. He reached for a tin mug and poured coffee with hands that had made more than one porch light steady. The shop smelled like boiled leather and lemon oil. "It was stored in the attic," he said, like he might as well tell her the sky was blue. "Nobody used it for a decade." He paused. "Until last Sunday." Lila heard the pause. The shops in Cedar Hollow had timelines. The silence was part of the town's grammar. "Who?" she asked. Caleb did not answer immediately. He fixed the lantern in the window and tapped its glass. "A woman came through. Said she saw a light on Miller's Bridge at dawn. Said if anyone's lantern ever came back to life on its own, that's what it looks like." A thin, bright memory unwound in Lila's chest. Miller's Bridge was the place where the river held its breath, the place where boys dared one another to jump and where lovers used to carve initials into the rail. She had not thought about that bridge in years, not since Jonah left without a clear goodbye, and with a letter she'd never opened. "You remember Jonah?" Caleb asked, like the name could be enough to pull the town into focus. Lila felt the name like a stone in her mouth. She had a dozen reasons why he'd gone. The city, a job, the itch for music beyond the river. She had a dozen questions that boiled down to one. Why did he leave the lantern by the bridge the night he left? The lantern had been Jonah's grandmother's. He'd told her stories about it, about how it was lit for nearly every big thing in Miller family history. He'd told her, laughing, that if you were ever lost, you should wait for the lantern. He'd never explained why leaving it by the bridge felt like putting a comma instead of a period on something. Lila set her case against the counter and felt suddenly clumsy. "I never opened the letter," she admitted. The confession came like a pluck on a low string. Caleb's eyes softened. "A lot of people keep their letters folded." He reached beneath the counter and produced a small, oil-dark box. The lantern inside was not ornate. It had a smudge on the brass like a thumb that had been held there too long. When Caleb tipped it, the glass caught the light of the window and shattered into a constellation of tiny suns. Lila swallowed. "You still want it?" Caleb asked. She didn't know. The lantern felt too much like an accusation and too much like a promise. She'd spent years building a life around stages and travel, learning to coax stories out of chords. Back then, the lantern had been a memory at the edge of the songs she wrote. It had been the place she left part of herself when she stepped onto a bus. Outside, a fiddle's bow scraped at the air. A busker had set up near the square, and the tune spilled through the cracked door, slow and hollow, a tune Lila could have played in her sleep. She listened, and the song rose in her like smoke, and with it came voices from the past that fit together like harmonies. The busker's song ended with a refrain that no one quite finished, and the fragment lodged itself in Lila's ears. She hummed the rest of the line without thinking. "Light the lantern, light the way, keep the things we cannot say." Caleb watched her hum. "People hear what they need to," he said. "Sometimes the lantern answers." "I'm not who I was when I left," Lila said. It sounded honest and hollow at once. She had spent so long telling herself that leaving was the brave thing. Now she wasn't sure whether returning was brave or just necessary. "Bravery and necessity look a lot alike in this town," Caleb said. "You take it home. See what it does." She carried the lantern up the hill toward her childhood porch. The house remembered her weight in the steps. A fence leaned out toward the road like a tired hand. The garden still had foxgloves that crouched like small lamps. She set the lantern on the table and turned the key in the lock of the glass, expecting it to be cold and dead. Instead, there was a faint warmth, like someone had left a cup of tea and gone to answer a door. Lila placed her hand on the glass and saw for a moment more than the reflection of the streetlight. She saw the bridge where Jonah had left, Jonah in a jacket too thin for November, the lantern between them like a small treaty. She heard his laugh, the one that made room in the air for everything that followed. For a second her throat tightened and music pushed at the back of it. She wanted to sing, to make sense of a memory by giving it a melody. Then there was a knock at the door. She turned, and there he was on the step. Not Jonah, but Mara's son, with shoes full of river mud and eyes too wide. "Miss Lila?" he asked. "There's a light on Miller's Bridge. Folks say it's the lantern." Her heart stuttered. The lantern in her hands had been warm and humming like a living thing. The lantern on the bridge was a rumour, a place where stories go to become more true. Lila felt the pull of both. "Show me," she said. They walked the path under the sycamores and found the town quiet as a held breath. Miller's Bridge rose like a spine over the river. In the gap beneath the rails, a pale light trembled and bent like a fish. As they came closer, Lila felt a song building inside her ribs, the kind of song that wants to be played with calluses and coffee. The lantern on the bridge was smaller than hers and older. It shivered as if it had been crying. Around them, windows bled light. A man across the way turned his porch chair to watch. Someone in the dark began to hum the song the busker had left unfinished. The town was awake with a sound that felt like waiting. Lila reached for the lantern's handle and then stopped. The bridge hummed underfoot. The river below sounded like applause and like grief at once. She could cross and take the lantern back, open letters, play the song and finish its line. Or she could leave it where it was and let the light keep doing what it did best, asking questions. Her fingers curled around metal that tasted of salt and memory. She did what she had always done when stories opened their palms. She played. She drew the tune out of the space between one breath and the next, a single bowed note that filled the bridge. The hum in the lantern answered, soft and clear. A pulse. A heartbeat you could set a rhythm to. Someone began to sing, low and sure. The words were new and old at once. Light the lantern, light the way, keep the things we cannot say. Jonah's name hovered in the air, unspoken. The lantern went bright enough to see by, and then dimmed, as if it wanted them to want more. Lila closed her eyes, let the music settle in, and for the first time since she left, let herself wonder whether the lantern was a guide, a trap, or simply a light that refused to be ignored. When she opened her eyes, there was a scrap of paper caught beneath the lantern's base. The ink was smeared, but a single word cut through the blur. Forgive. Her bow hand tightened. The bridge, the light, the town, the song. All of it waited like a held note. She had come back for a beginning. The lantern had offered her a word. Now she had to decide whether to sing what came next. The word forgive smelled of rain on dry earth, as if the town had been waiting for that one clean syllable to break whatever drought had been gathering. Lila held the scrap with fingers that felt suddenly foreign to her. The ink bled into the paper like it couldn't decide whether to stay or run away. She turned it over, hoping for more. Dates, a name, some tidy explanation. but the back was bare as a stage before the first chord. "Did you write that?" the boy asked, voice thin with curiosity. He looked half pleased and half terrified, like a child who'd snuck into the cellar and found the family recipe book. "No." Lila breathed, and the cold night air made the word visible. Her breaths looked like small ghosts, small melodies that vanished between the sycamores. But whoever did wanted someone to know. They returned to the house with the lantern swinging between them. The porch light made its shadow long and true. Inside, Lila set the scrap beside her coffee mug and tried to arrange her thoughts the way she arranged chords, some pattern that made sense when it was finished. The room smelled of lemon oil and old paper. The guitar case leaned against the chair like a patient animal. She thought of Jonah, the way you think of a song you haven't heard in years. The opening line arrives first, then the rest comes if you let it. The memory of him at the bridge was sharp enough to be painful, his coat against the cold, his hands pressing the lantern down. The way he'd said something about leaving that didn't sound like a goodbye because he didn't raise his voice high enough. The letter she'd kept folded all these years had been an accusation and a lullaby at once. She'd never opened it because the act felt like betrayal. Reading where someone had hidden their heart and then finding it different than she expected. Outside, the town hummed like a struck string. A neighbour's radio sputtered. Somewhere a dog barked twice and stopped as if embarrassed. The lantern on her table pulsed faintly, like a throat clearing itself before speech. Lila reached for her notebook and, the way a songwriter does when the tune arrives, started writing down what she felt. The words were messy, half lyric, half list of questions. Jonah's face came back between lines of ink. She slept poorly, if she slept at all. When she woke, the lantern was warm enough that it fogged when she put her palm against the glass. Coffee steamed beside the scrap. Her throat held a taste of the river, metal and green water, and with it came determination. She would open the letter today. If the lantern wanted forgiveness to be found, maybe it was better to meet it with facts and not only with songs. The envelope had been tucked into the back of an old shoebox under her bed, wrapped in a rubber band that had long since given up its elasticity. Her fingers trembled as she slipped the paper free. The handwriting was Jonah's, lean and quick, like someone writing while the world changed under his feet. She unfolded it like someone unfolding a map that might lead to something dangerous and beautiful. Lila, if you're reading this, it means I left the lantern where I thought light could find you if I couldn't. I won't make excuses about music or the city. Those are reasons that fit in a suitcase, not explanations that live inside a room. I'm leaving because I'm afraid of what staying does to me. I thought I could come back better. I thought I could let the music teach me how to keep the promises I break when I'm small. I was wrong about a lot of things. Forgive me for leaving the way I did. There are things I can't say to your face. There are things I need to learn in the dark. If the lantern finds you, keep it lit sometimes. Not to catch me, but to keep a shape for the person I hoped I might become. J. The letter smelled like old tobacco and rain. It was compact and honest in the way of someone who'd practiced being honest in private, but not in public. It didn't answer the big question, why he'd left without knocking, but it offered something narrower and sharper, that he'd left to become someone who might be forgivable. Lila read the lines several times, like tasting a chord until it settled. The word forgive on the scrap matched the plea in the handwriting, the lantern, the town, the song. They were pieces of the same asking. She had to decide whether that asking was enough. She walked down to the diner, where the noon light made the coffee silver. Mara handed her a pie slice, as if condolences and sweets could be sister commodities. Lila sat and listened to the town talk around her, about harvests and the mayor's new idea for the square, and how the lantern had flickered on Miller's Bridge twice since dawn. "Ain't nothing supernatural?" a man in a trucker hat declared from a corner booth. "Probably some kid with a candle." Mara shot him a look the size of a rule. "Maybe. Or maybe it's just something we're all finally admitting to, that we've been carrying around small griefs and refusing to set them down." Talk in Cedar Hollow practiced being small until it became a ritual. But talk had its own gravity. Lila left the diner with crumbs on her fingers and went where she usually went when she wanted to think. The river. The currents made a sound like fingertips on wire. She sat on the bank and untangled the knot of her own wanting. She wanted Jonah to have stayed. She wanted the lantern to be a simple omen. Most of all, she wanted the music that could turn abandonment into something bearable. Fingers find the guitar as easily as breath. She played the line that had lodged inside her at the bridge, a single phrase that rose and stopped, the musical question mark from last night. Then she wrote. Not a song yet, just words shaped by rhythm. The town passed by. A father with a paper bag, a teenager on a bike who looked like he was pushing the world away, a woman with a tray of canning jars. All of them glanced at the bridge, where a small light blinked like a cautious eye. "You're playing for someone?" a voice asked. Lila looked up. Jonah stood there, not at the bridge, but at the top of the path, like a ghost with a practical side. He looked older in a way the city had made him, edges more defined, a map of tiny lines by his eyes. He was not what she'd expected, not gone so much as rearranged. Her throat closed. All the things she wanted to say scrambled like birds, startled into the air. He walked down, careful and inevitable. Up close, his hand brushed the sling of a guitar case and then let it rest, as if the case was a burden he might not pick up again. "You read it?" he said, nodding toward the shoebox she still held. "I did," she said. Her voice wasn't small anymore. It had the width of someone who'd been practicing chords for years. "You left it folded. You left the lantern. You left..." Jonah held up a hand. "I know." I didn't leave because I didn't care. I left because I didn't know how to stay with what I felt without breaking the two of us. I thought the road would give me courage. It taught me other things. Mostly it taught me how much courage I hadn't learned yet. The river kept its slow applause. Jonah's face held a softness she hadn't known he had. They sat, and for a long while said nothing, letting the space between them gather the kind of sentences you can't rush. Apologies, explanations, the small confessions that stack like kindling. I saw the lantern last night, Jonah said finally. I didn't light it. I thought if I did, it would make promises that weren't mine to make. But I want you to know why I left it on the bridge. My grandmother used to tell me the lantern kept things that had no other place to be. She said not every light is for finding someone else. Sometimes a light is for holding the things we can't bear to look at. I thought if you ever needed that, you'd know where to look. Lila thought of the scrap with forgive pressed into it, of Caleb's tin mug warming his hands, of the humming lantern that wanted to be more than a prop. She felt the song inside her like a tide beginning to turn. You could have told me, she said. The words landed as gentle as a pluck on a muted string. He smiled, and it was almost rueful. I thought I could become the sort of man who could tell you. Turns out that's practice too. They spoke until the light thinned to silver, until the bridge's lantern trembled and the town started to shut like a book. At some point, without much fanfare, Jonah lifted his guitar and played a line that matched Lila's. Their notes braided together, not to finish the song, but to test how the harmonies fit now. The lantern answered with a single bright pulse, as if approving. When they stopped, the word on the scrap had shifted from an accusation into an invitation. Forgiveness, Lila thought, might not be a single act so much as a slow composition. There would be more nights of music and more shrugs and perhaps more letters. The lantern, for its part, blinked steadily. Not a judge, not a jury, but a light that refused to stop asking questions. Jonah rose to leave. He hesitated on the path, then reached into his pocket and handed her a small, folded photograph. It was of him and his grandmother on a porch, the lantern between them, the world behind them sunlit and unafraid. For you, he said, so you know what I was holding. Lila took the photo and felt the anchor of it. The lantern on her table hummed at home like someone settling into a chair. The river moved on, patient as a metronome, and the town slid into its routines. The bridge kept its light. Forgiveness, it seemed, would take time and tunes and a willingness to return more than once. Lila tucked the photograph into her notebook and listened to the last of the day bend into music. She didn't have the answer yet, not a final one, but she had a melody that might grow into truth if she played it often enough. As she closed her notebook, she mouthed the word the lantern had left: forgive. Then she started to hum the rest of the refrain, this time finishing the line herself, not waiting for someone else to do it for her. Light the lantern, light the way, keep the things we cannot say, she sang softly. Her voice trembled, but it wasn't empty. The lantern glowed a little brighter. Somewhere, beyond the river, a new tune began to form. Morning came in a soft grey that felt undecided, like the town wasn't sure whether to open its eyes yet. Lila stood at the window with the lantern in her hands. It didn't glow this morning. No pulse, no warmth. Just an ordinary object with a history that refused to sit quietly. She wondered if the light had done what it came to do, or if it was simply waiting to hear the truth spoken out loud. Today was the harvest fair, the only day Cedar Hollow acted bigger than it was. Families hauled tables to the square. Kids chased each other with paper crowns. The community stage, 3 planks and a set of mismatched chairs, leaned a bit more every year. Lila had played there 100 times growing up. Today she'd promised Caleb she'd play again. She didn't know if the town expected answers from her, but the stage had always been the place where truth found its shape. Jonah would be there. She felt that certainty in a way she couldn't explain. The letter had cracked something open. Their talk by the river had softened more of the edges. Forgiveness wasn't a yes or no. It was a road, and they were both on it, even if they walked at different speeds. She tucked the lantern into a canvas tote and headed toward town. The square was loud, but in a warm way. A band of teenagers tried to tune their instruments over the noise of frying dough and the smell of grilled corn. At the edge of the crowd, Jonah tuned his guitar with the quiet concentration of someone who didn't want to take up more attention than necessary. When he saw her, he gave a small nod. She returned it, letting the moment stay simple. Caleb waved them over. "You two closing the evening set?" he asked. Jonah glanced at Lila as if asking permission. Lila looked at the stage and then at the tote holding the lantern. "Yeah," she said. "We'll close." Caleb's smile was all the approval she needed. She spent the next 2 hours watching the town move around her. Kids tossed rings at bottles. Retired folks compared jam jars. Someone auctioned off quilts. But underneath all of it, there was a shared awareness of the bridge light, of the letter, of Lila's return. Cedar Hollow was small enough that personal stories became community business, but it never felt cruel, just invested. Near sundown, as orange light stretched across the river like spilled paint, Lila stepped up onto the stage. Jonah joined her. Caleb set a single battery lamp beside them. The crowd settled. Shoulders leaning on shoulders, cups steaming in hands. A hush rolled through the square. Lila pulled the lantern from her tote and placed it between them. A woman in the front whispered, "Is it going to light?" Lila didn't answer. The lantern wasn't a trick. It didn't perform on command. But tonight, it deserved to be present, a witness, if nothing else. Jonah strummed the opening chord, gentle, low, familiar. It was the phrase they'd played on the bridge, the one that hadn't finished itself for years. Lila felt her fingers respond without thinking. A harmony slipped out of her like she'd been practicing it all her life. Then came her voice. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't polished, but it was honest. She let the story spill into the melody, leaving home, chasing music, losing Jonah, losing herself, finding something again in the dark. She didn't say everything, but the song didn't need everything. Folk songs always left a corner unspoken. That was the point. Jonah took the second verse. His voice cracked once. It wasn't shameful. It was real. He sang about fear, about leaving because he couldn't say what he felt, about hoping the lantern would hold what he couldn't carry. People leaned in. A kid stopped chewing his caramel apple. Caleb's chin trembled. And as the final chorus approached, Lila felt the air shift. She felt the square exhale. She glanced at the lantern. Still dark. Until Jonah sang the old refrain with her. Light the lantern, light the way. Lila finished it. Keep the things we cannot say. A soft hum rose from the lantern. Not bright, just a faint warm bloom that made the metal glow like the last ember of a fire. The crowd murmured. Mara covered her mouth with her hand. Jonah froze, breath caught in his throat. Lila didn't touch the lantern. She didn't need to. The light held steady, as if acknowledging that the words had finally been spoken aloud. Not solved. Not erased. Just spoken. They let the last chord fade into the square. People clapped, but quietly, as if not to scare anything sacred away. When they stepped off the stage, Jonah looked at Lila with a question she'd anticipated, but hadn't decided how to answer. Does the light mean we're okay? He asked. Lila shook her head, not unkindly. I don't think the lantern tells us we're okay. I think it tells us we're telling the truth now. Jonah let out a breath he'd probably held for years. So where does that leave us? She thought about it before answering. Walking. Just not in opposite directions anymore. He nodded, eyes soft. I can do that. Caleb approached with 2 mugs of cider. That song'll be talked about for years, he said. And not because of the lantern. Folks heard something real tonight. Lila smiled. Then good. She picked up the lantern. This time it felt cool in her hands, empty, but not hollow. The light had done its work. The rest was hers and Jonah's to figure out. That night she returned to Miller's Bridge alone. The river moved slow as a lullaby. She set the lantern on the railing and let the quiet settle around her. Thank you, she whispered. She wasn't sure who she was thanking. Jonah's grandmother, the town, fate, music, herself. Maybe all of them. The lantern stayed dark, which somehow felt right. Stories need endings, not magic tricks. She walked halfway across the bridge before turning back to look. The lantern stood there, small and ordinary. It didn't glow. It didn't hum. It just waited in the moonlight like something that had never asked to be supernatural. only meaningful. And maybe that was enough. Lila headed home with her guitar on her shoulder and a melody forming quietly in her throat. It wasn't a love song. Not exactly. It was a song about beginnings that happen late, about bridges that don't burn, about letters finally opened. It was a song you could walk toward a future with, a song that didn't need a lantern to light the way anymore. Because for the first time in a long time, Lila knew where she was going.